The crisp night air carried the scent of pine and damp earth as four friends, Jake, Lisa, Ryan, and Emily, settled around their campfire deep in the secluded Blackwood forest. Their laughter echoed through the dense trees, blending with the crackling of burning logs. It was meant to be a weekend of adventure, a break from city life, and a chance to reconnect. They had no idea it would be their last night together. As they roasted marshmallows and shared stories, Ryan pulled out his camera. "All right, let's document this," he grinned, capturing shots of their smiling faces. Unbeknownst to them, just beyond the reach of the fire's glow, a pair of hollow, milky-white eyes watched hungrily. A mysterious stranger. The first sign that something was wrong came as a rustling sound from the underbrush. At first, they dismissed it as an animal, but the sound grew closer. Lisa, always the cautious one, grabbed the flashlight and pointed it toward the trees. A lone figure emerged, a man in tattered clothes, his skin pale and sickly, his mouth smeared with something dark. He stumbled forward, his eyes vacant, yet his body moved with unsettling determination. "Sir? Are you okay?" Jake asked, stepping forward. The man let out a gurgled growl, then lunged. Ryan barely had time to react before the stranger sank his teeth into his arm, tearing through skin and muscle. Ryan screamed, shoving the man away as blood gushed from the wound. The man snarled, his jaw working unnaturally, blood dribbling down his chin. Jake grabbed a branch from the fire and swung it, the burning wood colliding with the attacker's head. The man barely reacted before charging again. The first death. Lisa, acting on pure instinct, grabbed the hunting knife from her pack and drove it into the man's throat. He staggered, gargling something unintelligible before collapsing. But even in death, his body twitched violently, fingers clawing at the dirt. Ryan fell to the ground, clutching his arm. His breathing was ragged, sweat beading his forehead. I don't feel so good," he whispered, his voice shaking. Emily ripped off part of her shirt and pressed it to his wound, but Lisa's hands were trembling. "Guys. I don't think that was a normal person." Before they could process what had happened, another noise came from the woods. This time, there were more, heavy footsteps, low moans. The darkness beyond the trees shifted as multiple figures emerged, all with the same dead, hungry stare. "We need to go. Now!" Jake shouted. They scrambled, grabbing whatever supplies they could. Ryan was already weakening, his breaths growing shallow. The others hoisted him up, half dragging him toward their car. But the dead weren't far behind. And Ryan's fate was already sealed. The group sprinted through the dark forest, their breaths ragged, adrenaline surging through their veins. Ryan's body was heavy between Jake and Lisa as they half-dragged him, his legs barely moving. His skin had gone pale, his forehead damp with sweat. Emily kept looking over her shoulder, her heart pounding in her ears as the grotesque figures shambled after them, their snarls filling the night air. "Just a little more." Jake grunted, his muscles burning as he hauled Ryan forward. Lisa clicked the key fob in her pocket, and their SUV's headlights flickered to life in the clearing ahead. Relief flooded through her, until she saw the first of the dead step into the beam of light. A trap in the clearing. Two of them stood between the group and the vehicle, one with a torn-open stomach, intestines swaying as it moved, and the other missing half its face, its teeth bared in a permanent grin. More shadows shifted in the trees. "We're surrounded," Emily whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Lisa gritted her teeth. "We fight our way through." Jake, gripping the bloodied branch he had used earlier, didn't argue. He turned to Ryan, shaking him. "Hey, buddy, stay with me, all right?" Ryan groaned, his head lolling forward. His breathing was shallow, and his fingers twitched. Lisa's stomach twisted. She had seen enough horror movies to know what was happening, but she shoved the thought away. "Let's move!" Jake roared. Emily grabbed a tire iron from the ground near the fire pit. Lisa still had her knife. With weapons in hand, they charged toward the SUV. First kill, but not the last. Jake swung first, the burning branch smashing into the stomach of the nearest zombie. The smell of charred flesh filled the air, but the creature barely flinched. It lunged, clawing at him. Lisa came from the side, jamming her knife into its temple. The body dropped instantly. Emily screamed as the faceless one lunged at her. She ducked, then swung the tire iron, caving in the thing's skull. It staggered, twitched, then collapsed. For a moment, silence. Then Ryan let out a low, painful groan. Lisa turned, her heart sinking. His breathing had stopped. One bite, one death. Ryan? Jake shook him, but there was no response. Lisa and Emily exchanged a horrified glance. Jake's hands trembled as he pulled Ryan's lifeless body against him. "Come on, man, don't do this." Ryan's eyes shot open. But they weren't his eyes anymore. They were milky white, void of emotion, of life. Before Jake could react, Ryan lunged. Teeth tore into Jake's shoulder, ripping through flesh. He screamed, shoving Ryan back, but the damage was done. Blood spurted from the wound, soaking his shirt. Lisa's instincts took over. With a guttural cry, she slammed the knife into Ryan's skull. The body went limp, collapsing onto the dirt. Jake fell to his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder. No, 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 no. Tears streamed down Emily's face. Lisa stood frozen, staring at Ryan's lifeless body. Jake let out a pained chuckle, his face contorting with anguish. "Guess that makes two of us." Lisa and Emily locked eyes. The horror of the night was only beginning. The night was no longer silent. It was filled with the sound of heavy breathing, the rustling of the dead in the trees, and the faint, gurgling growls of the creatures that had once been human. Lisa and Emily stood frozen, their minds struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Ryan was gone. Jake was infected. And the dead were closing in. No time to mourn. Jake let out a ragged breath, his fingers pressing against the bloody wound on his shoulder. He chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "Damn it. I really thought I was gonna make it." Lisa swallowed the lump in her throat. We don't know how long it takes. Maybe there's time." Jake looked at her, and they both knew she was lying. Ryan had turned in minutes. He had barely had time to say anything before he became one of them. Emily wiped her tear-streaked face. "We have to go." Lisa nodded, her survival instincts kicking in. "Get to the car." Jake hesitated, his eyes darting to Ryan's body. His best friend. His brother in everything but blood. "We can't stay here." Lisa snapped, grabbing his arm and yanking him toward the SUV. Jake staggered but followed, pain etched on his face. Emily reached the car first, fumbling with the keys. Her hands were shaking so badly that she dropped them. "Emily, hurry," Lisa urged, scanning the tree line. Shadows swayed, getting closer. Emily cursed, snatching up the keys and unlocking the car. The moment the doors clicked open, they all scrambled inside. Lisa jumped into the driver's seat, Jake collapsing into the passenger side. Emily slid into the back, locking the doors just as the first of the undead slammed against the window. Nowhere is safe. The engine roared to life, and Lisa slammed her foot on the gas. The SUV tore out of the clearing, its tires kicking up dirt and gravel. The zombies disappeared into the darkness behind them. For a few moments, there was only the sound of the car's tires against the forest road. The headlights carved a narrow path through the dense trees, the outside world a blur of shadows. Jake let out a deep breath, his head resting against the window. His skin was already growing paler, and sweat dripped down his temples. Emily sniffled, rubbing her arms as if trying to keep warm. "What do we do now?" Lisa's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "We find help." "There is no help," Jake muttered. His voice was weak, distant. "You saw them. This isn't just some freak attack. It's something else." Lisa ignored him, focusing on the road. They needed to get out of the forest, back to civilization. Someone had to know what was going on. Then she saw the lights ahead. False hope. A gas station. It stood alone on the side of the road, its flickering neon sign barely visible through the fog. A truck was parked outside, its doors hanging open. Lisa pulled into the lot, her hands shaking. "We can get supplies here. Maybe a phone." Jake let out a weak laugh. "Yeah, maybe some painkillers too." Emily glanced at him, her expression torn between fear and sorrow. Lisa grabbed her knife and took a deep breath. "Stay close." They stepped out of the car, the air thick with the stench of gasoline and something rotten. The door to the gas station swung slightly in the wind, creaking. Lisa's gut told her something was wrong. And she was right. Because inside the gas station, something was waiting for them. The neon light of the gas station flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. A chill ran down Lisa's spine as she pushed open the door, the small bell above it jingling softly. The air inside was thick with the stench of something rotting, something long dead. Jake, pale and sweating, leaned against the doorframe. His breathing was shallow, his fingers twitching. Emily hovered near him, eyes darting anxiously around the store. Lisa stepped forward cautiously, gripping her bloodied knife. Shelves were overturned, snack bags and bottles scattered across the floor. Behind the counter, a radio crackled with faint static. It looked empty. But it wasn't. The horror in the dark. A soft dragging sound echoed from the back of the store. Lisa froze, tightening her grip on the knife. Emily whimpered, inching closer to Jake. Then the sound stopped. Lisa slowly stepped toward the source, a doorway leading to a darkened storage room. Her heart pounded as she reached for the doorknob. It was slightly ajar. With a deep breath, she pushed it open. A body slumped against the shelves. A gas station attendant, his name tag barely visible beneath the blood staining his uniform. His head lolled to the side, jaw slack. His arms twitched slightly, fingers curling and uncurling as if he was still trying to grab something. Lisa's stomach twisted. Then his eyes snapped open. With an inhuman growl, the attendant lunged. A fight for survival. Lisa barely dodged as the undead worker slammed into the shelf, knocking over cans and boxes. The sound was deafening. "Lisa!" Emily screamed from the front of the store. Lisa stumbled backward, raising her knife as the zombie staggered toward her. It moved fast, faster than the others. She barely had time to react before it swiped at her, its long, bloodied nails slicing across her arm. She hissed in pain but didn't let go of her weapon. Instead, she plunged the knife into its forehead. The creature spasmed, then collapsed at her feet. Panting, Lisa wiped the sweat from her brow. The cut on her arm wasn't deep, but it stung. Then she heard the worst sound yet. From the other side of the store, Jake let out a guttural scream. The turning. Lisa sprinted back to the front, nearly slipping on the mess of shattered glass and spilled soda. Jake was on the ground, convulsing. His veins darkened, spreading across his skin like black tendrils. His breathing turned into gurgling gasps. Emily knelt beside him, sobbing. "Lisa, do something." But there was nothing Lisa could do. The infection was taking him, faster than it had taken Ryan. His eyes flickered open, now clouded and dead. His body stilled. Emily's breath hitched. Jake? Jake moved. His arms shot forward, grabbing Emily's wrist in a vice-like grip. Emily shrieked, struggling to pull away. But Jake was strong, too strong. His mouth twisted open, revealing blood-stained teeth. Lisa reacted on instinct. She grabbed the tire iron from Emily's pack and swung it down with all her strength. The sickening crunch of bone filled the store as the weapon struck Jake's skull. His grip loosened. Lisa didn't hesitate, she swung again. And again. Until Jake was still. Emily collapsed into sobs, clutching her arms. Lisa stared down at what remained of Jake, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. 1 bite. 2 deaths. They were running out of time. Then, from outside, the sound of shuffling footsteps. The noise had drawn them. Lisa's eyes darted to the windows, dark figures gathered outside, pressing their rotting hands against the glass. They weren't safe. Not here. Emily, Lisa rasped, gripping her arm. We have to go. Now. Emily, still sobbing, nodded. Lisa clenched her jaw. The nightmare wasn't over yet. It was only getting worse. The first crack shattered the silence. A filthy, blood-stained hand slammed against the glass of the gas station's front window. Then another. And another. The creatures outside weren't just standing there anymore, they were pressing forward, moaning hungrily as their weight strained against the fragile glass. Lisa's breath hitched. They didn't have much time. Emily, still trembling from what had just happened to Jake, backed away from his lifeless, bloodied corpse. Her lips trembled, her body barely holding itself together. Lisa, her voice was weak, pleading. Lisa grabbed Emily's arm and yanked her toward the back exit. We have to move. Now. The first window shattered. A desperate escape. The undead poured inside like a slow-moving flood, their gnarled fingers clawing at the air, their lifeless eyes fixed on their next meal. Lisa didn't waste time. She kicked open the employee exit, pulling Emily into the night. The cold air hit them like a slap, but there was no time to stop. The parking lot was crawling with more of them. Shapes moved between the cars, the distant sound of feet dragging across asphalt echoing in the night. Lisa's eyes darted to the truck parked nearby. Its doors were still open from whoever had abandoned it earlier. She sprinted toward it, dragging Emily along. Come on. Emily tripped, stumbling to the ground. Lisa spun back, panic surging through her. Get up. Emily let out a sob, but before she could move, a set of decayed fingers wrapped around her ankle. A zombie had crawled from beneath a nearby car, its rotting mouth gaping as it hissed, yanking Emily toward it. Emily screamed. Lisa reacted on instinct, raising the tire iron and bringing it down on the thing's skull. A wet crunch split the air, and the creature went limp. Lisa yanked Emily up. Keep running. They reached the truck. Lisa shoved Emily inside, slamming the door. She scrambled into the driver's seat and grabbed the keys still in the ignition. For a moment, her heart stopped. Would it start? She twisted the key. The truck roared to life. Nowhere is safe. Lisa slammed her foot on the gas. The tires screeched as the truck barreled forward, mowing down anything in its path. The creatures slammed into the hood, some rolling off, others getting crushed beneath the tires. Emily curled up in the passenger seat, shaking violently. Her face was pale, her eyes unfocused. Jake's dead. Ryan's dead, she whispered, as if saying it would make it more real. Lisa gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. We can't think about that right now. Emily turned to her with wild eyes. How can you say that? They were our friends. Lisa clenched her jaw, forcing herself to focus on the road. Because if we don't keep moving, we're next. Emily fell silent. The road stretched before them, disappearing into the darkness. For a brief moment, it looked like they had a way out. Then Lisa saw it. A blockade. A mess of abandoned cars, broken-down vehicles, and debris littered the road ahead. There was no way through. Lisa cursed, slamming on the brakes. The truck skidded to a halt just in time. Emily sat up. No, 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 no. Lisa's mind raced. They had two options: go back and face the horde, or find another way through. Then something moved in the distance. Not a zombie. A light. Flickering from the second floor of a nearby motel. Lisa and Emily locked eyes. Someone else was out there. But were they friend or foe? The flickering light from the second floor of the motel was like a beacon in the darkness. Lisa's pulse pounded in her ears as she stared at it. It meant one of two things: someone was alive, or something was waiting for them. Emily swallowed hard. Do we go? Lisa scanned the blockade. There was no getting through. If they stayed in the truck, the dead would eventually surround them. They didn't have a choice. Yeah, she muttered. We go. Lisa threw the truck into park, yanked the keys from the ignition, and grabbed her tire iron. Emily hesitated before following, clutching a rusted wrench she had found in the back seat. The motel loomed before them, its windows dark except for the single lit room upstairs. The vacancy sign flickered, casting a ghostly glow over the parking lot. The air smelled of gasoline and decay. Something wasn't right. A silent welcome. The front door was slightly ajar. Lisa pushed it open with the end of her tire iron, stepping inside cautiously. The lobby was a wreck: overturned furniture, blood smeared across the walls, a dead body slumped behind the reception desk. Emily gagged, covering her mouth. God. Lisa ignored the corpse and moved toward the staircase. She kept her footsteps light, listening for any sound, any sign of movement. The flickering light was coming from room 207. Lisa stepped up to the door and knocked. Silence. Then, a voice, hoarse, hesitant. Who's there? Lisa exchanged a glance with Emily before answering. We're survivors. We need help. A pause. Then, the sound of locks being undone. The door creaked open slightly, revealing a man in his late 40s, his unshaven face streaked with sweat and dirt. He held a shotgun loosely in one hand, his eyes darting between Lisa and Emily. You weren't followed? He asked. Lisa shook her head. No. We lost them on the road. The man hesitated before stepping aside. Get in. Quick. The others. Inside, the motel room was dimly lit by a lantern. Two other people sat on the bed, a young woman in her 20s, her face bruised, and a teenage boy with hollow eyes. They looked exhausted, beaten. The man shut the door behind Lisa and Emily, locking it immediately. Name's Carter, he said. This is Mia and Luke. Mia gave a weak nod. Luke just stared at the floor. Lisa took a deep breath. What's going on out there? How did this happen? Carter sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. No one knows. One day, people just started changing. It only takes one bite. Lisa's grip on the tire iron tightened. She already knew that much. Mia spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. The infection spreads fast. No one's safe. Emily sat down on the edge of the bed, still shaking. Is there anywhere safe? Any rescue? Carter hesitated. There were rumors of a military outpost about 50 miles west. But, his voice trailed off. Lisa narrowed her eyes. But what? Carter's expression darkened. But we've got a bigger problem. Something worse than just the dead. Lisa's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Carter glanced at Mia and Luke before looking back at Lisa. The infected aren't the only things hunting people. A cold silence filled the room. Then, from outside the motel, a new sound echoed through the night. Not a growl. Not a moan. But laughter. Low. Twisted. Human. Lisa's blood ran cold. Someone, or something, was out there. And they were waiting. Lisa's fingers tightened around the tire iron as the eerie laughter drifted through the motel's cracked windows. It wasn't the guttural moans of the dead. It was something far worse. It was human. Carter moved swiftly, blowing out the lantern and plunging the room into darkness. Get away from the windows, he whispered harshly. Mia and Luke didn't need to be told twice. Emily pressed herself against the wall, her breath shallow, her body still trembling. Lisa's heart pounded. Who are they? She whispered. Carter didn't look at her. Instead, he gripped his shotgun tighter. Scavengers. But not the good kind. Outside, footsteps crunched against the pavement. More voices, low, murmuring, barely audible. Then, a voice called out. Come out, we saw your little truck. Lisa felt Emily tense beside her. Another voice, this one gruffer. We don't got all night. Either you come out, or we come in. Lisa shot Carter a look. He kept his face unreadable, but his fingers hovered over the trigger of his shotgun. Mia whispered shakily, they took our last group. We never saw them again. Lisa clenched her jaw. These weren't just scavengers. They were hunters. The kind that didn't just take supplies. They took people. The first shot. A sudden bang made everyone flinch. The sound of metal bending and glass shattering followed. Lisa's stomach twisted. They were trying to break in. We can't stay here, she whispered. Carter nodded. There's a fire escape at the back. Another crash. The front door of the motel was being forced open. They didn't have time. Go, Carter muttered. I'll buy you a few seconds. Lisa's eyes widened. You can't. Carter gave her a look that silenced her. He was already dead. He knew it. Lisa swallowed hard, then grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her toward the back door. Mia and Luke followed. As they reached the fire escape, the shotgun roared. A man screamed. Lisa shoved open the emergency exit, leading them onto the metal staircase. The freezing wind hit them, but they kept moving. Gunfire erupted inside the motel. Lisa didn't look back. She didn't have to. Carter was gone. No safe haven. They reached the ground, sprinting toward the tree line behind the motel. Mia clutched Luke's hand, gasping for breath. Where do we go? Lisa scanned the darkness. The truck was compromised. The road was blocked. Then, she spotted it. A barn, barely visible in the distance. It was their only option. Run, Lisa ordered. Emily, Mia, and Luke didn't argue. They ran. Behind them, the motel erupted in gunfire and screams. Lisa didn't know if it was the scavengers or Carter's last stand. All she knew was that they weren't alone in this nightmare. The dead weren't the only monsters in this world. The living were worse. The barn loomed in the distance, its wooden frame barely visible against the night sky. Lisa's lungs burned, her legs aching with every desperate step. Behind them, the echoes of gunfire and dying screams still rang from the motel. Carter was gone. The scavengers were still out there. And the dead were closing in. Lisa reached the barn first, shoving the doors open. The air inside was thick with the smell of old hay and rot. Wooden beams creaked overhead. She spun around, ushering Emily, Mia, and Luke inside. Find something to barricade the doors. Mia and Emily rushed to shove crates and tools against the entrance. Luke just stood there, shaking, his wide eyes staring at the ground. Lisa knelt beside him, gripping his shoulders. Luke, listen to me. We're going to survive this. But I need you to help, okay? Luke swallowed hard, then nodded. Just as they secured the last crate against the door, distant voices echoed through the night. The scavengers were coming. Nowhere left to hide. Lisa peeked through a crack in the barn wall. Shadows moved along the tree-line. The scavengers weren't just looking for supplies anymore. They were hunting. Emily gripped Lisa's arm. What do we do? Lisa's mind raced. If they stayed, they'd be trapped. If they ran, they'd be picked off one by one. Then, from behind the barn, came another sound. A low, guttural moan. Lisa's blood ran cold. It wasn't just the scavengers closing in. The gunfire from the motel must have drawn more zombies. Now, they were caught between two deadly forces. The only way out. Lisa turned to the others. We use it against them. Mia frowned. What? Lisa gritted her teeth. We let the dead in. Emily's eyes widened. Are you insane? Lisa didn't have time to argue. She ran to the side door of the barn and unlatched it. The moment she did, the first zombie stumbled in, a rotting, decayed corpse missing half its face. Lisa backed away. Get to the loft, she ordered. Mia and Luke scrambled up the wooden ladder to the hayloft. Emily hesitated before following. Lisa stood her ground, gripping her tire iron. The zombie staggered toward her, arms outstretched. Then, a voice from outside, one of the scavengers. Did you hear that? Lisa's heart pounded. She ducked behind a stack of crates just as the barn doors were kicked open. The scavengers stormed in, guns raised. And then, they saw the zombies. Chaos unleashed. It happened in an instant. The undead lunged. The scavengers opened fire. The barn exploded into chaos. One of the scavengers screamed as a zombie tore into his throat. Another was dragged down, vanishing beneath a pile of grasping hands and gnashing teeth. Lisa didn't wait. She climbed the ladder to the loft, panting. Below, the barn floor was turning into a slaughterhouse. The scavengers were fighting, but the dead were winning. Lisa turned to Emily, Mia, and Luke. We have to get out, now. There was only one way left. The roof. The final choice. Lisa kicked open a small window near the loft's ceiling. One by one, they crawled out onto the slanted metal roof. Below them, the barn burned. One of the scavengers must have fired at the oil lanterns. Flames licked at the wooden beams, turning the battlefield into an inferno. The undead didn't care. They burned and kept moving. Lisa spotted a nearby tree. It was their only chance. She turned to Emily. Jump to the branches. Then climb down. Fast. Emily's face was pale, but she nodded. One by one, they leaped. Emily. Mia. Luke. Lisa was the last. As she jumped, the barn collapsed behind her, sending sparks into the night sky. The nightmare isn't over. They hit the ground running. They didn't stop. Not until the burning barn was a distant glow. Not until the screams, both human and inhuman, faded. Only then did they collapse, gasping for breath. Mia was crying. Luke sat in stunned silence. Emily just stared at Lisa. Is it over? Lisa looked back at the destruction. The scavengers were dead. The barn was gone. But the world was still hell. She exhaled sharply. No. Not even close. She looked west, toward the rumored military outpost. It was a long shot. But it was all they had. Lisa got to her feet. We keep moving. Emily nodded. Mia wiped her tears. Luke slowly stood. Together, they walked into the darkness. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. The end, for now,